Reina.
Thank you. Thank you
Gracious
for your
introduction.
kind and gracious words. And thank you all for being here. You know, trust is a hot topic. And leaders around the world realize the importance of trust in leadership. But why should we, as HR professionals here in this room, pay attention to trust? Let's examine some of the common themes and some of the common challenges that leaders are striving to achieve and that they've been talking to us about. Number one, breaking down silos, stimulating teamwork and collaboration, deepening engagement and retaining talent, particularly the millennials and the multi-generationals. We've heard this morning, millennials need flexibility. They need meaning in their work. Helping people to step into and embrace change. Helping them to step into uncertainty, to ambiguity. Helping them to deal with that unknown. Helping them to develop healthy team and organizational cultures, particularly those that are agile. Helping them to make it safe so that each and every person can have open and honest dialogue. Making it safe to innovate, to create, and to take risks so that people can do their best work. So these are some of the challenges that people and leaders are talking to us about. But we would like to hear from you in your world as HR professionals and business leaders. Why is trust important to you? Why is it important to your business? Why is it important to your culture? And why is it important to your people? If you would reflect a moment, turn to your partner, and share those points, and then we'd like to hear from a few of you. Please begin. So why is trust important to you? Who would like to share? Why is trust important to you? Yes.
Thank you. I think the trust is very important to you purely because that will lead to communication and we can really deliberate on ideas that will lead to collaborative conflicts.
That's great. Excellent.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. So that open communication that contributes to dialogue, which contributes to new ideas, new creativity, and of course, new innovation. Others, why is trust important to you? What are some of the reasons why trust is important to you? Yes.
Trust makes us feel safe and open in a given situation.
Absolutely. Trust makes us feel safe, and we're open to possibilities and to new challenges. Yes?
I'm a psychologist, so I would like to add something into it. That's very, very important for the human relationship.
Yes.
It may be in the husband or wife, or it may be as a parent and child. So, or it may be a leader and the followers. So the trust is the first thing we always imbibe in our customers as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. And trust is foundational, not just in the workplace, but also to our families and those with whom we live with and love. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so we thought that trust is the glue that glues relationships together and creates stickiness in the workforce. We're very prone to process and science and objectives, and we kind of lose that stuff that keeps us together. Without it, things start to fall apart.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you so very
Thank
much.
you.
And that all does take trust. And what we know today is leaders are faced with a multitude of challenges, and yet they need their people to be productive. In the business environment, leaders need their people to work effectively, to work efficiently with one another. Leaders today also want their people to come together and to be fulfilled in their work, to feel good about what they do and how they do it. and to create a workforce, a workplace that helps people discover more fully their true potential. Leaders who build a high trust culture know that trust is absolutely essential to tap into the full potential of every single person in every role, in every level of responsibility, and across generations. This has not always been the case. Dennis and I have begun this work over 25 years ago. Actually, in September, we celebrated 25 years of marriage and 25 years of trust building. And in the early days when we would talk about trust, quite honestly, there were not that many people that were joining in the conversation. At that time, trust was felt as something kind of touchy-feely, not terribly relevant. And 20 years ago, this month, we released the first edition of our book, Trust and Betrayal in the Workplace. And when the first edition of our book came out, many people wondered, why would you write a book about trust? Well, this book is in its third edition and has become a multinational bestseller. So the good news for us in this wonderful HRD Congress is that we can share that leaders are no longer questioning the relevance of trust. They recognize how critically important it is. And around the world, there is an awakening of the need for trust. And Dennis and I are so honored to have made a contribution to that awakening. Yes, we've been doing the due diligence. For over 25 years, we've been researching trust in a myriad of organizations all over the world. The truth, some of our deepest insights, some of our deepest lessons have actually come from the reflection of our own lived experiences. Like many of you, I began to learn about trust in the earliest stages of my life. I was born in Africa, in the country of Eritrea, while it was under Ethiopian rule. The first body of water I swam in as a little girl was the Red Sea. My mother still beams to this day when she talks about the moment she saw me being held in the arms as a baby of Haile Selassie. My father was a military soldier. My parents were newly married. Throughout the years, we traveled from country to country and state to state, in military base to military base. When I was a little girl, we lived in Japan during the period of time of the Vietnam War. And I remember my father going off to war. And to this day, when I sit still and I reflect on that time, I can feel his whiskers brushing across my cheek as I kiss him goodbye one more time. I never knew where my father was going. I didn't know when he would come back, and I was aware there was a chance he may not come back. Because you see, my father fought in another war as well, the Korean War. And during that Korean War, he was taken into captivity and held as a prisoner of that war for nearly 3 years. While it was before my time, I had heard the stories, and I was very aware that something tragic could happen to my father each and every time he went off to war. My playmates and their families were going through the same thing. Their fathers and their husbands were going off to war. And during that period of time when our lives were turned upside down and we were the most vulnerable, we learned how to turn to one another, and we began to discover trust. I learned to trust in myself through the support of my playmates and their families. And I continue to reflect on that time in my life because I feel there are deep lessons there for us today. At a moment in time when our workplace is so tumultuous and there is a sea of ambiguity, there is also the ripest opportunity to help those that we serve to learn how to trust themselves and one another.
I learned about trust from probably some of life's most hardest experiences. I had cancer twice. I experienced a near-death accident in the wilderness that left me hospitalized for over 4 months. I went through, long before I met Michelle, I went through a very painful divorce, one that I did not want. But what these experiences taught me, it's not what happens to me that matters. It's what these experiences taught me, it's how I respond that counts. And what these experiences gave me, I found my life's work, I found my beloved Michelle's life partner, and I learned to trust again.
And you all, each and every one of you, have your own life experiences of trust from the earliest stages of your life and your experiences day in and day out. And what our life experiences can teach us is a very common truth. Trust is core and foundational. It represents a deep human need each and every one of us has to trust in another person, to be trusted by them in return, and to trust within ourselves. So when trust is present, we freely collaborate. It is safe for us to talk openly and honestly. When trust is present, we are able to tap into our deep internal core capability, and we are able to do our best work together. Everybody wants that, wants to do their best work, wants to make a difference. When trust is present, that best work is able to happen. That difference is able to manifest.
Harvard Business Review recently published an unprecedented longitudinal leadership study in which they found the single greatest predictor of those top performing leaders, those leaders who were the best of the best, those leaders who produced the top business results, were those leaders who were able to forge deep, trusting relationships. Think about it. The number one single predictor of top performing leaders in the world were those leaders who were able to build trust.
So when trust is present, what does it look like? When trust is present, it looks like alignment. People are aligned around goals and objectives and vision. People are aligned around communication. They actually know how to talk with one another. When there's an issue or a concern, they're able to put it out on the table and talk about it because they know in a high trust environment, it's safe. They will be heard, they will be understood, and they will be supported.
In fact, with high trust, there's a buzz, there's a can-do attitude. People are excited about what they're doing, they're confident, and they're committed. Energy expands. In fact, people want to work for leaders they trust. And ultimately, trust is the bridge between the human need for connection and the business need for results. And we cannot be effective as leaders and as people working in organizations without trust. Trust is an absolute asset that leaders need.
So there's something very interesting around this dynamic of trust that Dennis and I have discovered. While it's something we all want and we all need, there's also the tendency for many to have a wait and see attitude. It's common for people to sort of stand on the sidelines a little bit and want to wait and see what is the first step my leader's going to take. What is that person going to say or do? Really, how safe is it for me to trust them? Well, the truth is, trust, it begins right here with me, right here with you. It begins with our attitudes, our outlooks, and our beliefs, and we lift it off the pages through our behavior. This phenomenon, this core human need called trust, is reciprocal. We must be willing to extend it. We must be willing to take the first step to give and extend our trust in another person, for us to receive their trust in return. And trust is built step by step, incrementally over time, through our attitude, our outlook, our belief, our behavior, and the steps we take in giving it and receiving it. Step by step, we create that high trust culture that everybody wants to be a part of.
As a matter of fact, that our research has shown that not only is trust reciprocal and it's created incrementally, step by step over time, there's actually 3 dimensions of trust. There's trust of character. We do what we say we're going to do. There's trust of communication. We communicate openly and honestly and transparently. And there's trust of capability. We're able to leverage our own and each other's skills and abilities. The first dimension, trust of character, is the starting point of any business relationship. The truth is, it's the starting point of any relationship, quite frankly. But let's take a look at some of the behaviors. When there's trust of character, people know what they can expect from their leaders, and their leaders know what they can expect from their people. People can rely on one another. They can depend upon one another, and they care for one another. They know what to expect. They care for one another. They're in it together. I got your back. You got my back. We're in this together. We're aligned on purpose. Trust of character is the baseline starting point. I'd like to share a story with you. I'd like to share a story about Jim. Jim learned the importance of letting his people know how much he cares about them. You see, Jim was the head of a consumer manufacturing plant, about 600 employees, that produced 160 million cases of beer a year. Now, while that may seem a lot, the truth of the matter is it was the lowest of the company's standards. As a matter of fact, Jim's plant was the lowest plant in a 13-wide nationwide plant network. Jim and his people were struggling. But to his credit, he reached out for help. When we began to work with Jim, we found and made an interesting discovery. You see, Jim talked about how important people were, how important relationships were, but his people didn't know it. His actions did not match his words. As a matter of fact, Jim failed to ask his people what they needed to be successful in their jobs. He failed to listen to their issues and concerns. As a result, people pulled back. They stopped caring. They stopped caring about Jim and his leaders, and they stopped caring about the business. Trust, morale, and productivity were at an all-time all-time low. Now, Jim wanted to do something about this, so he went to work, and he got coaching, and he got the support he needed. And Jim began to learn to earn the trust of his people. And he began to help his people learn to trust not only themselves, but one another. Over the months ahead, Jim and his people began to model the trust-building behaviors. And a year and a half later, Jim's plant went from the lowest producer in that 13-wide nationwide network to the #1 position. In fact, that year, Jim's plant won the most coveted Manufacturing of the Excellence a Year award. And they actually won it 2 years in a row, which was the first time in the company's 150-year history that one plant won it 2 consecutive years. You see, Jim and his leaders found that they can never take trust for granted. They can never take trust for granted. And last checking up with Jim, we found that his plant maintained that same #1 position for the last 6 consecutive years.
So the trust of character is a dimension of trust that sets the tone and the direction of how people work together and builds alignment in effort and establishes clarity of expectations. Trust of communication helps to create an environment of openness and honesty and transparency. Trust of communication helps to cultivate the way people speak with one another and is practiced when the behaviors on the screen are lifted off the pages and put into motion. Trust of communication is present when people freely share information. They have at the tip of their fingers what it is that they need to do their jobs, or they know where to go to get it. In high trust cultures, people do not hoard information for their own self-serving needs. They share information to support one another to be successful. And when mistakes happen in a high trust culture, what happens? What happens in a high trust culture when mistakes are made? There's accepting, because people feel safe to tell the truth. People feel safe to admit their mistake, because in a high trust culture, people are supported to learn and grow and actually benefit from their mistake. In a high trust culture, feedback is not used as a weapon to point out a discrepancy. Feedback is used in the highest, best interest to support the growth and development of every single person there. And when there's issues and concerns in a high trust culture, what happens? People talk them through because they know it's safe to get them out on the table, because they know they're going to be heard, they're going to be seen, they're going to be understood, and they're going to work through them. In high trust cultures, people do not talk about one another behind their backs. They do not gossip. They do not point the finger. They do not blame. They go directly to the person they have a struggle with. And with an open heart and with the soundest of intentions, they talk it through together. A senior executive of a global airline and his team learned what can happen when they go to work in trust of communications. This is the team that was responsible for the operations of a global airline, and they had deep pride in their work, yet they were struggling. They had a major IT initiative that had stalled out, and they were responsible for this IT initiative worldwide. It was a significant endeavor that they were holding for this organization, but it was behind schedule, and they were stuck. They took a very bold, courageous step, and they actually assessed the level of trust in their team. They took a step to take stock at how they were actually behaving, and they made some interesting discoveries. They learned that they actually did share commitment to the team. They shared commitment to the project, and they shared pride in their work. They also discovered that they actually respected one another's skills and abilities and were proud about the raw talent that existed in the team. They also discovered that they were not talking with each other about problems and challenges. They were talking about them with everybody else. They also discovered that they tended to be rather judgmental and had a tendency to point the finger at one another. So they got down to work. They rolled up their sleeves and they said, you know what? We're going to learn how to do it differently. We're going to work on this together. We're going to put a stop. No more talking about one another behind the backs. We must stop that. And they began to experiment, and they learned how to cultivate new skills together and new ways of behaving, and they shifted their attitude and their outlook. And in 9 months, their initiative was on course. In 1 year, they reported a $1 million savings in associated strategic planning costs. And in 1 year, their employee engagement scores had gone up by 9 points, all because of the shift that they committed to making in learning how to behave and show up differently with one another to build trust rather than to break trust.
We just want to share a quick study that we've done with you. Actually, let's take trusted capability first. Trusted capability is the third behavior that builds trust. And trusted capability is about acknowledging people's skills and abilities, allowing them to do the jobs that we hired them to do versus micromanaging them, or allowing people to make decisions, or at least empowering them to make decisions. And if we can't, we at least involve them and seek their input in those decisions, and helping people learn new skills so that we can have an agile and a very learning organization. These are the behaviors that build trust of capability. And all three of these behaviors work hand in hand together. Trust of character supports trust of communication, supports trust of capability, and they're very interrelated. And these are the behaviors and the 3 dimensions and the 16 behaviors that build trust.
Would just love to hear spontaneously from a couple of folks. In a workplace environment, in teams and leadership relationships, when these behaviors are being practiced consistently and a high level of trust is being produced, how might it feel?
How does it feel?
How do you think? How does it feel? Feels good?
Confident,
safe,
secure,
energizing. Trust is something that we feel. We don't necessarily see it. We feel it. And when people go to work and are aligned and practicing these behaviors, the energy is expansive. It feels good. It creates a team and a workplace where we want to go, we want to show up, and we want to do our best work. And Dennis and I have given you a few examples of some of the results that are produced in return. We're going to be coming to closure on our time with you in this moment in just a couple of moments, but we did want to let you know that tomorrow we are going to be having a focused conversation on what do you do when these behaviors break down. When trust becomes vulnerable or it's low, what do? How can you rebuild trust? We're going to introduce you to a construct of 7 steps to rebuild trust and heal and renew the spirit of relationships in teams and an organization. Dennis and I are also here throughout the entire Congress. We have a booth. We would love to talk with you. We'd love to hear your stories. And please stop by our booth, and we'd love you to meet some members of our global trust-building team who are here to help us spread trust throughout the world.
So in conclusion, we've seen that when leaders give trust, they get it back in return, and so much more. Energy expands, people feel confident, people feel committed. When we help people raise their awareness of these three dimensions and the behaviors that build those, we can create workplaces where people want to work and want to show up and want to produce results. So in closing, Michelle and I would like to ask each and every one of you as business leaders, what will you do in your organizations, in your teams, and in your relationships to build greater trust with those with whom you work and serve and those with whom you live with and love? Thank you very much.